Welcome back, mathematicians. In this video, we are going to solve quadratic equations by completing the square. So let's first identify the standard form of a quadratic equation. It's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are real numbers, but a cannot be equal to 0. Otherwise, you would not have a quadratic equation. It would be linear or just a constant. So let's look at how to solve. And to do this, let's go ahead and write up an equation here so we can use this as an illustration with these steps. But what if I had the quadratic equation 2x squared plus 12x plus 4 equals 0. So the first thing we need to do is move the constant to the other side. So in other words, in this situation, we would want to move the 4 to the right side. So we're going to subtract 4 to both sides. So now what we have is 2x squared plus 12x is equal to -4. Next, we want to divide all terms by the leading coefficient if it's not equal to 1. In this situation, what we have is a leading coefficient of 2, so 2x squared plus 12x is equal to -4, and we want to divide all terms by 2 to get x squared plus 6x is equal to -2. Then finally, we want to complete the squares. Now, the goal of completing the squares is to convert the quadratic expression to a perfect square trinomial. Here's an example of a perfect square trinomial. A perfect square trinomial is x squared plus 4x plus 4. Now the reason this is a perfect square trinomial, because when you factor that, you get x plus 2 times x plus 2. In other words, the factors are identically equal, which means you can rewrite this as x plus 2 to the second power. So all perfect square trinomials can be factored in that form and then rewritten as x plus 2 quantity squared. Now let's solve this quadratic equation by the strategy completing the squares. So the first thing we're going to do is subtract 3 to both sides. And so we have x squared plus 4x is equal to -3. Now we don't need to divide this equation because the leading coefficient is equal to 1. So next what we do is we rewrite this as x squared plus 4x plus blank is equal to -3 plus blank. Now we include those blanks because we're trying to convert, on the left side, we're trying to convert this into a perfect square trinomial, and we include them on both sides because we need this equation to stay consistent, and so we have to add what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So the value, the constant that we put into that blank is b divided by 2 quantity squared. So in this case, b is my 4, so it's going to be 4 divided by 2 quantity squared, which is equal to 4. So this is going to be adding a 4 to each side of the equation. Now let's factor the left side. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when you factor a perfect square trinomial, the factors are identical. So this will be x plus 2 times x plus 2, and it's equal to +1 when you simplify -3 and +4, when you find the sum of those two values. Now we can rewrite this as x plus 2 quantity squared is equal to 1. From here, now that we've successfully completed the squares, we need to use what's called the square root method to finish this problem. We are going to take the square root of both sides. By taking the square root of both sides, it does cancel out the square root and the squared. Those two operations undo each other. So you'll have x plus 2 is equal to. Now the number one thing that people miss when they do this problem is that they forget the plus or minus here in front of the 1. To understand why we have to include the plus or minus, let's look at a separate equation. Let's say we have x squared is equal to 4. Well, there's two values that actually satisfy this equation, and that would be -2, which when you square it is equal to 4, and also +2, where when you square it, it's equal to 4. So when you solve this equation right here, you would have square root both sides, and as a result, you would get x is equal to plus or minus 2. So we always include the plus or and the minus whenever we're square rooting as a process to solve an equation. So we square rooted both sides, we then need to include the plus or minus. Now we subtract 2 to both sides, and so we're going to get two answers. X is equal to 1 minus 2, or x is equal to -1 minus 2. The minus 2, the -2 doesn't change. It's the 1 that changes signs. And so you get two answers, x is equal to -1 or x is equal to -3. And those are your two solutions. All right, guys, good luck.